That Christmas Eve, I drove over 1,000 miles only to find my daughter huddled on the porch in the bitter cold. The lights inside the house reflected the smiles of those who once called it family. I didn't know then that the rescue that night would become a battle to reclaim both our souls. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Rose Larson. I'm 65 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I still remember that Christmas Eve as if it were yesterday, a night that should have been filled with warm light, joy, and laughter, yet instead shattered my heart into pieces. It wasn't the cold outside, nor the biting wind. It was the coldness inside that house, the Whitlock house, the place where I had placed my hopes for my daughter's happiness, where I believed Emily would find the peace and love she so deeply deserved. But all I saw was indifference, distance, and the fragments of a family already broken. I had driven all the way from Portland, over 1,000 miles, clinging to the hope that Christmas could be a new beginning for us. After everything that had happened, after months of living in fear and pain, I truly believed this would be a chance for my daughter and me to reconnect, for Emily to spend the holidays surrounded by her husband's family, to feel the love and care she'd been missing for so long. But that uneasy feeling haunted me from the moment I started my trip. Something wasn't right, and by the time I stepped through that doorway, I knew hope had already left me. When I arrived, the scene before me was nothing like what I had imagined. The house was beautifully decorated with twinkling lights, tables full of lavish dishes, and laughter spilling out from the living room. Yet, it was all just a facade. I stood at the doorstep, staring into that fake warmth, my heart filling with dread. And when Harold opened the door, I knew immediately that things were not as I had hoped. "Rose," he said flatly, his tone as dry as winter air, as if greeting an unwelcome guest. "You're early. We're still getting things ready." I looked at him, trying to keep my composure. "I came to see my daughter, Harold," I replied, my voice slightly tense. "Not to join the party." I stepped inside, my eyes brushing past Evelyn, his wife, whose expression was as cold and distant as ever. Ryan, my son-in-law, stood nearby, that usual smug look on his face. His mocking gaze made me want to turn around and leave immediately. But I had come all this way, and I wasn't going to back down. "Rose, I suppose you could join us?" Harold said, but I could tell it was nothing more than a polite formality, devoid of any sincerity. "You'll feel comfortable soon enough." I shook my head. I didn't come here to socialize. I came to see Emily. My voice was steady, though a storm was raging inside me. I didn't know where to begin, how to even find my daughter in that cold, unwelcoming house. I walked past them without another word. The Whitlock home always made me feel like an outsider, uninvited, unwanted. Everything about it felt hollow, stripped of warmth, a stark contrast to what Christmas should have been. Children elsewhere would be playing and laughing, but this place felt like a prison. I moved through those dimly lit rooms, the laughter from the living room growing fainter with each step. I knew I had to find Emily. I had heard her voice over the phone recently, tired, restrained, her words often cut short. I knew something was wrong, but I hadn't wanted to face it. I couldn't bear the thought that the Whitlocks could be treating my daughter this way. I walked into the kitchen, where the light was softer, but no less cold. The counters were filled with colorful dishes, yet Nothing about the scene felt comforting. And then I heard it, the faint sound of crying. A soft, trembling sob coming from somewhere behind the house. My heart clenched. A mother always knows her child's voice, even in pain. An unstoppable wave of instinct surged through me, and my feet moved on their own. I followed the sound down the hall, past the empty rooms, until I reached the back door. I opened it, and the sight before me stole my breath away. Emily was standing out on the porch, shivering in the freezing Christmas night. She was wearing only a thin shirt, her frail body trembling uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her pale face, and her eyes were hollow, void of the light they once held. Without thinking, I ran to her and wrapped her in my arms. The cold didn't matter. Nothing did. All I wanted was to hold her close, to get her inside, to remind her that her mother was here, that she was not alone. "Emily," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What happened, sweetheart? Why are you out here?" She looked up at me, her eyes dim and distant. "I just needed a little space," she said weakly, as if all her strength had been drained away. I couldn't listen to another excuse. "No, you don't need to be alone anymore. I'm not leaving you here. We're leaving now." Emily said nothing, just let me hold her as I led her back inside. But the moment we stepped in, the entire house fell silent. The laughter, the chatter, all gone. Every pair of eyes turned toward us. Harold approached, his face tight with irritation. "Rose, what is the meaning of this?" I met his gaze, my anger barely contained. "Don't pretend, Harold. Whatever's happening here isn't love or care. My daughter is suffering, and you're the reason why." Ryan smirked from behind his parents. "Come on, Rose. She's fine. Don't make a scene." My voice hardened, rising with fury. "You don't understand, Ryan. You can push her down as many times as you want, but I won't let you anymore. Emily is my daughter, and I will do anything to protect her." I didn't wait for their response. I turned and took Emily's hand, leading her out of that house. The cold night wrapped around us, but I didn't care. I didn't need to look back. We were free, and that was only the beginning. After leaving the Whitlock house, Emily and I stepped into the freezing, snow-covered night without saying a single word. Everything around us was the opposite of what I had hoped for when I came here. Christmas was supposed to be a time for families to gather, to share warmth and joy. But for me, it was the night when every shred of hope was crushed. In that biting cold, only one thought burned in my mind. I had to protect my daughter. I had done everything I could to keep her safe. But now, I knew that what mattered most was freedom. Freedom from the cruelty of the Whitlock family and the chains that bound us for so long. Everything changed in an instant. But that single moment took me a long time to truly understand. During the drive back to our new apartment, Emily said nothing. She sat beside me, her gaze fixed on the window, lost in her own world, replaying everything that had happened. As for me, there was only one feeling inside: fury. Not anger at the Whitlocks, but at myself, for allowing Emily to endure such pain for so long. I had let her suffer their sharp words, their contempt, their quiet cruelty, things no one should ever have to face. When we finally arrived at the new apartment, I couldn't erase the image of that house from my mind. The cold, expressionless faces of Harold, Evelyn, and Ryan still lingered like shadows. But as I stepped into the small apartment I had prepared for us, I knew this was where we would begin again. It wasn't big, but it felt different, softer, warmer, something I had never felt in the Whitlock home. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, filling the room with a quiet brightness, as if a small miracle had begun to unfold. Emily sat down on the sofa, her eyes dull and lifeless, as if the past had drained her completely. She looked at me, her lips trembling, but said nothing. I didn't rush her. I knew that words of comfort meant nothing right now. Only actions could make a difference. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice steady, even though a storm raged inside me. Emily didn't answer at first. She lowered her head, absent-mindedly touching the small necklace around her neck. After a long silence, she looked up at me, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know, Mom," she said softly. "I feel like I'm not myself anymore, like I've lost everything." Those words hit me like a blow to the chest, but I couldn't let her sink any deeper into that darkness. I had to act, because if I didn't, I knew she might never find her way out. I sat beside her and took her hand in mine. "You still have me, Emily, and I'll never let you go through that again. All you have to do is trust me. We'll get through this, together." She didn't reply, only nodded faintly and turned her gaze back toward the window. She was searching for peace, trying to reclaim something that had been stolen from her. And though she said nothing, I could see in her eyes not surrender, but defiance. There was still a spark there, a quiet strength. She was fighting her way back, and I knew I had to help her find that strength again. The rest of that day passed in silence. I didn't push her to talk or force her to confront her pain. But deep inside, a plan was forming. It wasn't enough to simply get her away from that toxic place. I needed to help her rebuild herself, to stand tall again. And that couldn't happen with words alone. It would take real action. The next day, I went to see an old friend, Jake, someone I'd known since my Taekwondo training days. He was a police officer now, but no matter what uniform he wore, I knew he was someone I could always count on. More than anyone, Jake understood the power of perseverance and the strength of a mother who refuses to give up. He didn't ask many questions. He understood immediately as I told him about Emily's situation. "Rose," he said firmly, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "I know you can do this. We're not going to let them win. She deserves a chance to start over, and I'll help you make that happen." Having Jake by my side brought me a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't just an old friend. He was a man who understood the meaning of loyalty, family, and compassion. His words gave me a new perspective. Helping Emily wasn't just about protecting her from harm. It was about helping her stand on her own, to rediscover the strength she had lost. We began the legal process, but nothing about it was simple. Harold, being a retired judge, had influence that made everything more complicated. Still, I wasn't afraid. I knew I could fight, even when the odds were against me. On the first day in court, I could feel the unease in the air. The people around us looked at me as if I didn't belong there. But I didn't care. I wasn't there for them. I was there for my daughter. As I stood in that courthouse lobby, memories flashed through my mind. The sleepless nights, the broken phone calls, the hollow look in Emily's eyes. And I made a silent vow. I would not let this continue. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't talk about humiliation or money. I told my story, the story of a mother who fought to keep her daughter safe, who refused to let her become another casualty of cruelty. I didn't need to win the case on paper. What I needed was to protect my daughter's spirit, to help her find herself again. And even though the legal outcome wasn't what I had hoped for, I knew I had won something greater. I had forced the Whitlocks to face the truth. And though I might have lost in court, I knew this fight wasn't just mine. It was for every mother who has ever fought to protect her child. That day, after I left the cafe following my meeting with Harold, a feeling like a silent storm began to creep into my mind. His words echoed in my head, not because they were convincing, but because they weighed on me heavier than ever. The Whitlock family, with their power and prestige, would not let me win easily. They would not surrender my daughter without a fight. But I also knew that no matter how hard he tried, I would not back down. I could not. When I stepped out of the cafe, the snow was still falling thickly, blanketing the empty streets. Cold and quiet, just like the mood inside me. The streets seemed unchanged, but inside me, everything was different. I had realized something important. I was no longer the wounded mother, powerless while watching my daughter be harmed. I had stepped out of the Whitlock's protective embrace, and I would not go back. When I returned to the apartment, Emily was still sitting at the dining table as usual. She was reading a book, the lamp's soft light gently illuminating her full face. The feeling inside me was strange. It wasn't exactly peace. Both of us were trying to face the big decisions ahead. I could protect my daughter from the Whitlock family, but I could not shield her from the ghosts of the past. She hadn't completely escaped their influence. "What happened, Mom?" Emily put the book down, looking at me with concern, as if she had noticed the change in how I had confronted Harold. I sat down across from her, confusion washing over me. "He won't give up, Emily," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "He never quits that easily. And I can't just stand by and watch him ruin our lives anymore." Emily was silent for a moment, her eyes bewildered but also understanding. "Mom, I don't want to see him anymore. I don't want to hear what he has to say. I just want for us to be at peace." My daughter's words hit me like a sting. I knew she had endured too much, and I couldn't let her keep living in that darkness. I didn't know where this life would lead us, but one thing I knew for certain: I wouldn't let outside forces control us anymore. No one, no family, had the right to decide my child's happiness. After the meeting with Harold, I knew the Whitlocks would not stop there. They would continue to threaten and exert control, which made me even more determined. I had to act, not just for Emily, but for myself. We couldn't live forever in fear. To do that, I needed to prepare better, both legally and mentally. The next day, I decided to see our lawyer. He was the first person I turned to when deciding to divorce and to protect Emily from the Whitlocks. During that time, he had worked tirelessly to secure our rights. But I knew this battle wouldn't be that simple. Every step I took could be obstructed by the Whitlocks, and I had to be well prepared. "Rose, you must understand that this fight won't be easy. The Whitlock family may try to pressure us, but I will do everything to protect your and Emily's rights," the lawyer said, his voice serious. I looked at him, feeling the determination in my gaze. I don't need a huge victory. I just need my daughter to live a peaceful life, not to worry about things that happened in the past. The lawyer nodded, jotting down a few important notes. "What matters is that we hold our ground. They won't let you go easily, Rose. But if you don't give up, I believe we can win." A sense of strength flared up inside me. The lawyer's words fanned the flames of my resolve. I couldn't let the Whitlocks keep controlling our lives. I had to do everything to protect my daughter and ensure she would not have to live under their lies and oppression. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt much more confident. I knew things wouldn't be easy, but I would not give up. I wasn't fighting only for myself. I was fighting for Emily, for our future. The next day, I received a call from Jake. He had found some important information I could use in the legal battle. "Rose, I talked to a few people in the field, and I found some weak points in the Whitlock family. They aren't as perfect as they appear." It felt like a curtain had been pulled back before my eyes. I knew Jake would be a tremendous help in this fight. He wasn't just a friend. He was the most reliable companion I could ask for. "Thanks, Jake. I'll need all the help I can get to face them." "We'll win, Rose. I won't let them hurt you and Emily easily." Jake's words were a firm promise. I no longer felt alone in this fight. I had not only a lawyer and Jake, but also myself. I had power. I had the strength of a mother, and I would never give up. That day, Emily and I went for a walk in the park near our home. I looked at my daughter, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer in her eyes, a spark of hope. She was no longer afraid. She was beginning to trust herself and her future. I knew, no matter what, we would get through this. "How do you feel?" I asked as we sat on a park bench, the golden leaves gently falling around us. "I feel better, Mom," Emily answered, her eyes lighting up. "I don't know what will happen, but I believe we'll make it through." I held my daughter's hand, feeling the power I was creating. "We will make it through, Emily. We will start over, and no one can stop us." That feeling, strong and confident, made me feel like I could face any challenge. The Whitlocks might be a powerful force, but I had the power of love, of determination, and I would not let us fail. This battle had only just begun, but I was ready, and I would fight to the end. Each day that passed, I felt something more clearly than ever before. Our lives could never go back to the way they once were. This journey wasn't just mine. It was Emily's too. She had endured too much over the years, and even though I could finally protect her now, a deep worry still lingered in my heart. Could I really heal all the wounds of her past? Could she ever find peace within herself again? One quiet weekend evening, as I was preparing dinner for the two of us, Emily walked into the kitchen, her expression thoughtful. Her eyes still carried traces of sadness, though they no longer looked at me with fear or disappointment as they once did. Maybe, little by little, she was realizing that I would always be here for her, no matter what happened. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to talk to you about the things that happened before, about the times I lost the most important things in my life." I turned toward her, sensing the tension in her tone. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, Emily," I replied gently. "I'm here to listen whenever you are." Emily quietly sat down at the small kitchen table, her gaze resting on the teacup I had just placed there. Several moments passed before she spoke again, her voice faltering, as if these words had been locked away inside her for years. "I've lost 4 times, Mom. 4 miscarriages, and each time I felt like I was being thrown away, like no one could really see me," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "I felt like I couldn't do anything right in anyone's eyes, like I was a burden. Our family, especially Harold. They never forgave me for that. And I don't think I can forgive myself either. I stood frozen, my heart tightening with every word she spoke. I knew Emily had suffered, but I'd never imagined her pain ran this deep. 4 losses. 4 times she had to face shame, guilt, and judgment from the very people who should have loved her most. I sat down beside her, placing my hand over hers, feeling the tremor in her fingers. Emily, you're not to blame for what happened, I said softly, trying to ease the ache in her heart. You didn't choose this. You've carried so much for so long, and you don't have to bear it alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll always be right here with you. Emily looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes glimmering in the soft light. I don't know, Mom. I feel like I've failed. As a wife, as a mother. Every time I lost a baby, I felt like I couldn't handle anything anymore. My family, they kept criticizing me, and I thought it was all my fault. The lump in my throat grew heavier. I couldn't begin to imagine the pain she had carried all those years. Her losses weren't just the children she never got to hold. They were pieces of herself, her confidence, her joy, her belief that she was enough. Emily, I said quietly, I know it's hard, but you're not alone. You have me. You have people who love you. You don't have to live in that pain anymore. You have every right to happiness, and I'll help you find it. Emily sat in silence for a long while, her eyes lost somewhere far away, in that blurred space where painful memories still lingered. She had been battling herself for so long, fighting guilt, shame, and heartbreak. But I knew that no matter how many times she fell, she would rise again, because she had me, and I would never let her fight alone. After a moment, she looked back at me, a faint light flickering in her eyes. Mom, what can I do to move past all this? I don't want to live with this guilt anymore. I smiled softly, feeling my heart lighten for the first time in what felt like forever. You don't have to do anything, Emily. You just need to start believing in yourself again. You deserve love. You deserve happiness. And I'll be here to help you, step by step. After that night, everything began to change. Emily stopped hiding her pain, and I could see her slowly beginning to open up, to accept herself again. Each day, she regained a little more of the confidence that the Whitlock family had stolen from her. She was not a failure. She was strong, a survivor who had faced unimaginable loss and still stood tall. I no longer saw guilt in Emily's eyes. Instead, I began to see light, resilience, and hope. She was learning to trust herself, to believe that she was worthy of peace. And for me, after everything we had been through, I too began to feel a quiet sense of renewal, a belief that no matter how powerful the Whitlocks were, we could endure. Every day, I started teaching Emily Taekwondo again. Not to turn her into a fighter or an athlete, but to remind her that strength doesn't come only from the body. It comes from the spirit. Every kick, every movement carried meaning, resilience, confidence, and the power to rise after every fall. I wanted her to learn how to protect herself, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. We started with light training sessions, and gradually I saw Emily grow stronger. She wasn't just learning the movements. She was learning to face her pain, to accept her scars as part of her healing. One afternoon, during a training session, Emily suddenly looked up at me and said, Mom, I feel like I'm coming back to myself. I feel like I can face anything now. Seeing her smile, a real, radiant smile, I knew we had come so far, and I believed with every fiber of my being that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We would never go back. Winter passed, with bitter winds and thick layers of snow, blanketing the small street where Emily and I lived. But that cold no longer made me feel lonely or powerless. On the contrary, I could feel a strength inside me that I had never known before. This journey of ours, from living under the shadow of the Whitlock family to finally standing up for ourselves, had changed everything. I wasn't just protecting my daughter anymore. I was learning to protect myself. I remembered the early days when I first entered the Whitlock family. No one warned me about the traps that awaited. My love for Emily made me believe that their home would bring us peace. But little by little, I realized how wrong I was. What I truly needed wasn't a house filled with influence and prestige. It was a home built on safety, honesty, and love that didn't come with manipulation or control. That realization grew stronger every day. I no longer felt fear at the thought of the Whitlocks. I no longer trembled when facing Harold or Evelyn. They might have power and wealth, but those things could never buy genuine compassion. And I knew, no matter how many obstacles stood in our way, I would never let them hurt us again. That morning, when I woke up, a sense of purpose coursed through me stronger than ever before. I knew today would be an important day. After years of living under the Whitlocks' suffocating grip, today I would rise. Today, I would declare that we were free, that we would never return to their darkness again. I had long accepted that we couldn't keep running. We had to face the truth, to confront what had happened. The Whitlocks were not an ordinary family. They never tolerated defiance. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Today, I would do what I hadn't dared to do for years. I would claim our freedom, mine and Emily's. Emily woke up later than I did. When she came into the kitchen, still half asleep, I could see a flicker of worry in her eyes. It wasn't fear of hardship or uncertainty. It was the anxiety of the confrontation ahead. She didn't want another battle, but I couldn't let the Whitlocks continue to haunt us. "How do you feel?" I asked, meeting her gaze with both love and steadiness. She stood there quietly for a long moment before exhaling softly. "I don't know if I'm ready, Mom," she said at last. "But I trust you. I just don't want to live in fear anymore." Her words tightened something deep in my chest. I knew that no matter how fragile she felt, I would be her shield, her wall against every storm that life could bring. "We'll be fine, Emily," I said firmly. "I'll always be by your side. You'll never face that cruelty again." When we left the apartment, I could feel the change in both of us. We no longer looked back with dread. We walked forward with quiet confidence, unchained from toxic ties and the people who once tried to break us. The courthouse that day didn't look like what I had imagined. I had prepared myself for a battle, but when I stepped inside, I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt as if I were standing on the stage of my own life, and everyone else was just a supporting character. Every eye in the room turned toward me, but I didn't feel small anymore. I was stronger than I had ever been. Harold and Evelyn sat across the room, their faces as cold and stiff as ever. But I didn't see them as powerful anymore. They were just people, flawed, fragile, and desperate to cling to control. And I wasn't afraid to face them. I had made my choice. I would fight to the end for Emily. When it was my turn to speak, I rose to my feet, my eyes locking onto the Whitlocks without a flicker of fear. "I stand here today, not to ask for forgiveness, I began, my voice clear and unwavering, but to demand justice. The Whitlock family has taken from my daughter not only the children she lost, but also her confidence, her dignity. They made her believe she was not enough, that she was weak. But today, I stand here to say, we don't need them. We don't need their control. My daughter will live her own life, free and full of hope, and I will protect her with everything I have. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel the tension, not only from the Whitlocks, but from everyone present. What I had spoken wasn't a legal argument. It was the truth of a mother's fight for her child. This wasn't a battle of law. It was a battle of love and courage. Harold sat frozen, his face flushed with anger, but he said nothing. Evelyn looked at me with that same icy stare, but I didn't care. I had spoken the truth. And even if they refused to accept it, truth has a way of standing on its own. The hearing ended quietly. There was no applause, no official declaration of victory. But I didn't need one. What mattered was that I had done what was right. I had stood up for my daughter, for myself, for our freedom. And I knew, no matter how hard the Whitlocks tried to stop us, we would never go back. As we stepped out of the courthouse, I turned to look at Emily, and for the first time, she was smiling. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of peace. A smile that said, "We made it through." "We're going to be okay, Mom," she said confidently. I smiled back, holding her hand tightly. "Yes, we are. We've made it through, and no one will ever hurt us again." We walked out of the courthouse, not as victims, but as survivors, stronger, freer, and ready to start the life we had fought so hard to claim. And in that moment, I knew our new life began today. Life after leaving the courthouse was never the same. It wasn't an instant transformation, nor some miracle that made everything perfect overnight. But deep down, I knew we had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. Though the Whitlock family still had their connections and influence, I no longer felt fear. I had fought, and we had won our freedom. And that was what mattered most. In the days that followed, I felt the weight and meaning in every step we took. I hadn't just changed my own life, I had changed Emily's. She was no longer that frightened girl, no longer dependent on people who didn't know how to love. She was beginning to stand tall on her own, and I knew that nothing could stop her anymore. We moved into a new apartment, a small but cozy space where the Whitlocks' presence could never reach us. No more criticism, no more manipulation. Everything felt new, from the air we breathed to the little routines we built together. And in that newness, we began to find ourselves again. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, filled with love and quiet peace. And I knew this was where we would rebuild our lives. Every day, Emily and I worked to make things better. Sometimes, I taught her Taekwondo, not to turn her into an athlete, but to remind her that true strength comes not only from the body, but from the spirit. Taekwondo teaches patience, endurance, and above all, self-protection, not just physically, but emotionally. One morning, as we practiced together, I noticed how much she had grown. Her kicks were sharper, her movements more confident, but most importantly, her posture had changed. She no longer hesitated. She'd become a fighter, ready to face whatever life threw at her. "You're doing great, Emily," I said proudly as she finished a complex form. She smiled, her face glowing with newfound strength. "Mom, I feel like I can do anything. I'm not afraid anymore." Looking at her, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Our new life had truly begun, and I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would overcome them together. A few weeks later, when things had settled down, I decided to meet with our lawyer again to continue the legal proceedings. The Whitlocks hadn't given up, and I knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But I wasn't afraid. I was ready. I didn't just want to protect my daughter. I wanted to ensure that we would never again be forced to live under their control. When I met with the lawyer, he told me the Whitlocks were trying to pressure the court into regaining custody of Emily. They were using every trick they could to make us look weak, to reassert their power. But I didn't panic. I had allies. Jake, who had always stood by us, our lawyer, who worked tirelessly, and, most importantly, myself. I had the strength of love and belief in who we were. "What do we do next?" I asked, my voice calm but full of resolve. The lawyer met my gaze steadily. "We move forward. They won't back down easily, but we'll do everything we can to protect you and Emily." I nodded, feeling that familiar fire return. "We won't give up. The Whitlocks may have money and influence, but they can't take away our right to live freely. Emily deserves better." After the meeting, I went home and sat with Emily. She was quiet, lost in thought. "Mom," she said softly, "I don't want to face them again." I reached over and took her hand gently. "You won't have to, Emily. I won't let them hurt us anymore, I promise." She looked at me then, her eyes shining with determination. "I believe you, Mom." And with those words, I felt as though I could face the whole world. No matter what the Whitlocks did, no matter how powerful they were, I wasn't alone. I had friends. I had my daughter. And I had myself. No matter how long it took, we would claim the freedom we deserved. That day, I decided to seek support from the community. Just as Jake had helped us, I knew we couldn't fight this battle alone. I began reaching out to organizations and people who stood for justice and helped survivors rebuild their lives. One of the places I found was a nonprofit that supported victims of abuse and coercive control. They provided resources to help protect Emily's rights and offered guidance for the legal battles still ahead. Their support gave me a profound sense of comfort. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. In the weeks that followed, progress came slowly but surely. Emily began therapy to heal from the trauma she had carried for so long. Each session helped her regain a bit more of her confidence. She smiled more, she talked openly, she began to live again. During that time, I also started teaching her about setting healthy boundaries, how to protect herself not just from danger, but in relationships, in life. The Taekwondo lessons became more than physical training. They became lessons in self-respect and freedom. One afternoon, while we were practicing in the small backyard, Emily suddenly stopped, turned toward me, and said with conviction, "Mom, I feel stronger than ever. I can do anything now, can't I?" I smiled and took her hands in mine. "You can do anything, Emily. You're stronger than you'll ever realize. And I'm so proud of you." With every step forward, I knew one thing for certain. We would never go back. We would never again be prisoners of pain or victims of the Whitlocks' control. Our new life had truly begun, and I would always be there, beside my daughter, guarding her future and lighting the path ahead with hope. Life was no longer the same. That feeling, waking up in the morning and seeing Emily standing on her own 2 feet, no longer living under the grip of the past, made me realize that we were beginning a new chapter. It wasn't a miracle, it was healing. I could see the change in Emily, but more than that, I could feel a transformation within myself. There were moments when exhaustion tempted me to give up, but I always remembered we weren't fighting alone. It wasn't just me anymore. It was a family, a community, and we were not alone. That day, as sunlight poured into our apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would keep moving forward, not only to protect Emily, but to rebuild what we had lost. The Whitlocks hadn't given up, but I could no longer let them destroy what remained of my daughter's peace. What strengthened me most was knowing that we were no longer isolated. We had found support, not just from Jake or our lawyer, but from a community full of compassion and courage. Emily and I had connected with nonprofit organizations that helped people like us, those who had survived emotional and psychological abuse. They didn't just offer legal aid, they built a network of healing, therapy, support groups, and spaces where survivors could finally breathe. Each meeting reminded me that I wasn't fighting in the dark anymore. One afternoon, during a group session at the organization we joined, I looked around the circle and saw people from every walk of life, each of them carrying their own pain, but also their own fierce desire to be free. Mothers, daughters, people who had lived for years under the weight of control, but who had now found the courage to rise. Their stories weren't just about suffering. They were about rebirth. There was a woman named Linda, whose story brought tears to my eyes. She had endured years of psychological abuse. Her husband controlled every dollar she earned, every decision she made, until she believed she was worthless. She lived in a cage of fear and shame until the day she found the strength to say, "Enough." Her story was a beacon, a reminder that no matter how dark life became, change was always possible. "Rose, I understand how you feel," Linda said gently, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "I used to think I'd never escape, but I realized that healing starts from within. We have to learn to love ourselves before we can truly love anyone else." Her words echoed in me like a quiet revelation. For too long, I had lived in the shadows of dependence and control, but now Emily and I were walking into the light, into a life without manipulation, without fear. After each meeting, I felt stronger, and so did Emily. She began attending therapy sessions to heal the scars that still lingered inside her. There were days when she was tired, when the pain seemed too heavy, but I could see her slowly reclaiming herself. Every day was another small step toward peace, toward the life we both deserved. One evening, as we sat together watching a movie, I saw Emily laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in what felt like forever. Her smile was open and unguarded. She wasn't hiding anymore. She had learned to face her emotions, and I knew that was the first true step toward recovery. "Mom," Emily said suddenly, her eyes bright, "I think I'm ready to go back to school." Her words made my heart swell. She was ready to step back into the world, to dream again, to trust life again. Watching her courage brought tears to my eyes. "I always knew you could do it, Emily," I said softly. "You're so much stronger than you think, and we'll do this together, every step of the way." She looked at me with eyes full of love and gratitude. "I know you'll always be there for me." And that was all I needed to hear. We didn't need to face life alone anymore. We had each other, and that was enough. In time, I began to realize something else. Not only was Emily healing, but I was too. The wounds inside me weren't the kind that disappeared overnight, but I was learning to love myself again. Years of endurance and sacrifice had made me forget who I was. But now I understood. Only by loving myself could I truly protect and love my daughter. One day, during another group session, I met a woman named Sarah. She had survived an emotionally abusive relationship, much like I had. Sarah taught me something powerful, that healing wasn't just about taking action. It was about forgiveness, not for those who hurt us, but for ourselves. Rose, she said kindly, her eyes steady and warm, you fought a long, hard battle. But don't let your past control your future. Let it go and find happiness for yourself. Her words stayed with me all day, and for the first time, I truly understood that I had been living too long inside anger and resentment. I had been letting my pain define me. But now I needed to forgive, not because the Whitlocks deserved it, but because I did. Only then could I be free. In the days that followed, I made a choice to live not only for Emily, but for myself. I would no longer let the past dictate who I was. I would build a life worthy of both of us. One morning, as we stood together in the kitchen making breakfast, I looked at Emily and felt something profound, a quiet, unbreakable bond. She was no longer that fragile girl I once had to rescue. She had grown into someone strong and brave, ready to face the world with her own light. Mom, I love you, Emily said softly, her voice full of warmth. I love you too, Emily, I replied, my voice steady but tender. And I'll always be here. We had begun again, not just today, but in that very moment. And I knew, no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, with love, with courage, and with the unshakable faith that we had finally found our way home. As time went by, I began to realize that life for Emily and me had found a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, not a life without hardship, but it was our life. A life we chose for ourselves. A life we could control, where we were no longer chained by fear or haunted by the echoes of the past. We were rediscovering who we were, not as fragile or powerless women, but as strong, determined individuals who could stand tall no matter how the world changed around us. One morning, as sunlight streamed softly through the window, I looked at Emily's face. She had changed so much, not just in appearance, but in spirit. I realized that everything I had done, every effort I had poured into helping her see her own strength, was finally bearing fruit. The uncertain fear in her eyes was gone. Her steps no longer faltered. She was growing, walking into the world on her own 2 feet. This transformation hadn't come from escaping pain. It came from facing it, from learning to accept it as a part of life. And perhaps most importantly, we no longer felt alone in that journey. That day, I decided to teach Emily something I had learned after all these years. Inner strength isn't something that comes easily. It's something we must build, slowly, deliberately, and it begins with learning how to protect ourselves, not only physically, but within our hearts. Emily, I said as we stood in the backyard, preparing for another Taekwondo session. Today, we're going to try a new form. But before we begin, I want you to understand something very important. She looked at me with curious, attentive eyes. I'm listening, Mom. I want to learn. I smiled, feeling the warmth of trust in her gaze. True strength doesn't come from powerful kicks or perfect movements. It comes from knowing who you are, from believing in yourself, and from never letting anyone or anything make you feel unworthy. Emily paused for a moment, thinking deeply. I understand, Mom, but how do I know when I'm strong enough? How do I stop being afraid? You'll never stop being afraid, Emily, I said gently. Fear is a part of life. But what matters is that you don't let it control you. Every time you face it, you'll grow stronger. I'll always be here to guide you, but you'll have to take each step yourself. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with clarity. I will, Mom. I'm not afraid anymore. As we began training, I noticed the difference in her movements. She no longer worried about making mistakes. Instead, she focused on every motion, learning to control her body and her mind. With every completed form, I saw pride flicker in her eyes. She wasn't just learning Taekwondo. She was learning confidence, balance, and resilience. After each session, we would sit together and talk about what she had learned. Not just in Taekwondo, but in life. About facing herself. About the quiet strength that comes from perseverance. Mom, Emily said one evening as we sat by the window, watching the snow drift outside. I feel so much stronger now. I don't feel weak when I think about the past anymore. I know I can do anything. Her words brought a lump to my throat. She was no longer the frightened, silenced girl I once had to protect. She had grown. She had learned to love herself, to trust her own strength. And I knew that this was the first true step toward a future she could build with her own hands. Life still had its challenges, but I felt steadier than ever before. And I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together. One afternoon, I decided to take a break from our routine and do something different, something that would remind us how to simply be. I signed us up for a pottery class, something I had once loved but abandoned long ago. Emily, though busy with her own responsibilities, agreed to come with me. We found a small pottery studio in town, warm and filled with the smell of clay and sunlight. As the class began, I watched Emily's hands carefully shaping the soft earth. Her laughter filled the room, light and unrestrained. She let go of her worries, her body moving with freedom and purpose. Watching her, I felt a quiet, overwhelming pride. She was no longer bound by fear or self-doubt. She was living fully, moment by moment. At the end of the class, we looked over our creations together. Emily smiled as she held up a small vase she had made. Mom, she said, her eyes bright. I think I can do anything now. Not just pottery, but anything in life. I'm not afraid to try anymore. I looked at her and realized that life doesn't need to be easy to be beautiful. With enough strength within us, we can overcome anything. And no matter how difficult the road ahead, with love and faith, we will always stand tall. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't helpless. We had reclaimed our strength. After class, we stepped outside and walked slowly under the soft afternoon sun. The air was crisp and golden, full of quiet promise. Watching Emily walk confidently beside me, I felt something awaken inside, a calm joy, a sense that I was truly alive again. Life, though imperfect, was ours. And that was enough. Thank you, Mom, Emily said warmly, for everything, for never leaving me. I smiled, gently squeezing her hand. I'll always be here, Emily. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. And as we walked down that sunlit street, I knew this wasn't just recovery, it was rebirth. Our story wasn't about survival anymore. It was about living. That spring arrived gently, carrying with it a soft warmth and the first rays of sunlight after a long, bitter winter. I still remember the feeling. That quiet, golden morning when I opened the window and heard birds singing outside. No more snow blanketing the streets, No more icy wind seeping through every crack in the walls. Only the fresh scent of spring air and the sound of Emily's laughter echoing through our small apartment. It had been so long since I'd heard her laugh like that. A real laugh. Pure, unrestrained, and utterly free of the forced smiles that once masked her pain. Our lives were nothing like those dim, suffocating days in the Whitlock mansion. Gone were the tense dinners, the cutting remarks, the eyes that followed every movement with quiet disdain. Now, every morning, Emily and I brewed coffee together, walked through the neighborhood, and talked about simple things. The smell of the air, the flowers blooming along the fence, what we might cook for dinner. No more apologies, no more tears, only trust and peace. I think that's what people mean when they talk about freedom. Not freedom from others, but freedom from the chains within ourselves. Emily had changed. She was no longer the fragile, withdrawn young woman who flinched at the mention of her past. She laughed more now. She spoke with confidence. And more than anything, she had learned how to forgive. Not the people who hurt her, but herself. One afternoon, when the sun poured gently through the window, I found Emily sitting quietly at our small wooden table, her hands resting on a steaming cup of tea. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the depth of reflection. I knew what she was thinking about: the past, the losses she had endured, and the long, difficult journey toward loving herself again. I sat beside her without saying a word, placing my hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I used to blame them, and I used to hate myself for not being strong enough, but I don't want to carry that anymore." I looked at her, my heart swelling with emotion. "Are you sure, Emily? Forgiveness? It's not an easy thing." She smiled, a calm, genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. "I know, but I've carried that weight for too long. I can't live with it anymore. I used to think forgiving was weakness, giving up. But now I understand. Forgiving is what lets me live again. Forgiveness is laying down the chains I've been dragging behind me." At that moment, a quiet light passed through me. My daughter had grown. I had once told her that true strength doesn't come from revenge or resentment. It comes from keeping compassion alive, even after being hurt. And now, she understood. "Have you forgiven them?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Emily shook her head, then nodded, faintly. "Not exactly, Mom. I'm starting with forgiving myself. I've been so harsh with me. I kept thinking everything bad that happened was my fault. But I forgot something. I was a victim too, and I deserve to be happy." My throat tightened, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I had waited years to hear those words. So simple, yet they held the weight of healing and freedom. I placed my hand on her shoulder, my voice trembling. "My love, forgiveness isn't a gift you give to them. It's a gift you give to your own soul, so you can walk away and never be pulled back again." Emily looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "I know, Mom, and thank you for teaching me that. If it weren't for you, I'd still be trapped in my own pain." I smiled gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. "No, Emily, you saved yourself. I just showed you the way." That evening, we sat quietly together as a soft breeze stirred the curtains. The golden sunlight filled the room, wrapping us in its warm, forgiving glow. I could feel peace radiating around us, The wounds were no longer bleeding. The silence no longer hurt. Two hearts, finally healing. In the days that followed, Emily began to keep a journal. She said she wanted to record her emotions and every small step in her recovery. Sometimes I read a few lines, not out of curiosity, but to understand her better. And within those pages, I saw a new version of my daughter, thoughtful, grounded, and full of self-love. There was one passage I will never forget. Some wounds never disappear, but they teach us how to live without pain. Some memories never fade, but they remind us that we were strong enough to survive. I cried as I read it, not from sadness, but from pride. Emily had learned what so many never do. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let the past define who you are. And then, as if by some quiet miracle, everything began to change. Emily started volunteering at a women's support organization. She wanted to help others find strength, just as I had helped her. I watched her stand before a crowded room, her voice steady, her smile bright, teaching other women how to rebuild their trust and reclaim their worth. And my heart overflowed with pride. My daughter had become a light, a small flame, but strong enough to guide those still lost in the dark. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony, Emily turned to me and asked, "Mom, do you ever regret it? Everything we did? Leaving the Whitlocks?" I smiled, my gaze drifting toward the fading horizon. "No, Emily. If I had to do it all over again, I would. It took me years to realize that peace doesn't come from winning or losing. It comes from knowing you've chosen the right path. I chose you, and I've never regretted that." Emily squeezed my hand gently, her voice trembling. "I don't regret it either, Mom. No matter how painful it was, I'd still choose freedom. And I know, without you, I wouldn't be here today." I tightened my grip on her hand, my eyes stinging. "You don't owe me anything, Emily. All I've ever wanted is for you to live happily. That's the greatest gift you could ever give me." Above us, the stars began to shimmer across the night sky. A soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from nearby gardens. In that moment, everything felt still, peaceful. The years of pain had finally faded into memory, leaving only love, forgiveness, and gratitude. We sat there for a long time, saying nothing, but in the silence, we both understood. Forgiveness wasn't the end of our journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter. And in that new chapter, there would be no more fear, only freedom. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. Soft sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden ripples across the kitchen wall. Fragile, shimmering, like the first breath of a new day. I stood there quietly, taking it all in. The pale light, the gentle aroma of coffee, the faint birdsong drifting in from outside. It was so simple, so ordinary, and yet, to me, it felt sacred. This was the kind of morning I had dreamed of for years. No shouting, no cold, judging stares, no heavy silence over breakfast in that lifeless Whitlock mansion. Now, in this small apartment, every laugh, every word between me and Emily was a note of freedom. Emily stepped out of her room, her brown hair loose, her eyes bright in the morning sun. She smiled when she saw me stirring my coffee with a small wooden spoon. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice still soft, but no longer trembling. "Good morning, my love," I replied, setting the cup down and pulling out a chair for her. Mornings like these were the greatest reward life could give me. For so long, I didn't dare to dream of peace this simple, I only knew how to fight, how to protect my daughter from people who hid cruelty behind wealth and power. But now, everything had changed. I could breathe without fear, and Emily could laugh without pain. "Mom," she said as she sliced a piece of bread, "I've got my first art class today. I'm a little nervous, but I think I should try." I smiled, feeling light as air. "You have nothing to be afraid of. You've already survived the worst. What's left is learning how to enjoy the life you deserve." Emily looked up and nodded slowly. "I know. I just want to start everything over, Mom. I want to live a life I choose for myself." "And you already are, Emily," I told her. "Every time you smile, every time you dare to dream again, that's you rebuilding your life." I still remember the early days after we left the Whitlocks. The fear, the uncertainty, the endless nights. I worked late hours, teaching Taekwondo at a small community center, just to keep our apartment and pay for her therapy. And Emily, she had to learn how to live again, from buying groceries to cooking to trusting people. But through those hardships, we found something stronger than pain: love and resilience. There were nights when I thought I couldn't go on, and every time, Emily would come to me, hold my hand, and whisper, "Mom, you taught me how to stand tall. Now it's my turn to remind you. We'll get through this. You're the strongest person I know." Those words saved me. They reminded me that as long as you have someone to love, you can survive anything. Months later, I decided to reopen a small Taekwondo class in the neighborhood, not for money, but because I wanted to share what had saved us. I hung a simple hand-painted wooden sign outside the door. "Taekwondo. Find the strength within." At first, there were only a few students, kids who were bullied at school, a few women wanting to rebuild confidence, and an old widower who came just to stay healthy. But slowly, the room filled with energy, with warmth. I didn't just teach them how to strike or block. I taught them how to face fear. I told them that Taekwondo wasn't about fighting others. It was about learning to stand tall, both in the ring and in life. One day, Jake, my old friend, the man who had stood by us through our darkest times, came by. He was the same as ever: quiet, steady, kind. He watched the children practice, then turned to me with a gentle smile. "You still have that teacher's presence, Rose," he said. "But it seems lighter now." I laughed. "Maybe because I'm not angry anymore." Jake nodded, his eyes soft. "Yes. When someone learns to forgive, they become stronger than anyone else." After class, he helped me tidy up the mats. As the sun set through the windows, he looked out at the horizon and said, "I always knew you'd make it. You didn't just save Emily, Rose. You saved yourself." I swallowed hard. "No, Jake. I just did what any mother would do." He smiled faintly. "Not every mother has the courage to." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the quiet training hall. The light from the sunset painted the floor in amber. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind through the windows, and I realized every wound, no matter how deep, can heal if we have enough patience and enough faith in the good that still exists. Emily started working at a small cafe nearby. Every afternoon, I'd stop by and sit at my favorite corner table, watching her serve customers with a calm, kind smile. One day, I overheard her talking to an elderly woman at the counter. "I used to be so afraid of the world," Emily said softly. "But my mom told me that life isn't meant to be feared, it's meant to be loved. And since that day, I stopped hiding." The customer smiled, and I, sitting far away, felt tears sting my eyes. I didn't need to say a thing. Emily understood everything. She no longer lived in the shadow of her pain. She had become the light itself. That evening, as we cooked dinner together, Emily burst out laughing when I burned the eggs. "Mom, you might be great at breaking boards, but you're terrible at frying eggs," she teased. I laughed so hard I could barely breathe. "I can teach you how to kick through 3 bricks, but apparently not how to cook breakfast." We both laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks. Later, we sat on the balcony under the starlit sky. The air smelled of jasmine. The night was quiet and full of peace. After a while, Emily spoke softly. "Mom, I think this is what a real family feels like." I turned to her, smiling. "You're right, Emily. Family isn't where you're born. It's where you're loved, where you can be yourself." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you, Mom, for choosing love over hate." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, my darling, thank you for teaching me how to forgive." The next morning, I woke early again. Sunlight brushed across Emily's sleeping face, her hair tousled, her expression serene. I smiled, quietly closing the door behind me as I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was crystal blue. Wisps of pink clouds drifted lazily across the dawn. For the first time, it felt like the whole world was smiling back at us. I breathed in deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of peace. And in that moment, I knew our journey had come full circle. There was no applause, no final verdict of victory, only the gentle light of morning and the quiet certainty that we were, at last, free. My voice came out in a whisper, carried softly on the wind. Love, compassion, and resilience. That's what makes a family. Then I looked up at the sky, smiling through the light. Our story, mine and Emily's, was just beginning. Morning light streamed gently into our small apartment, slipping through the white curtains and spilling over the faces of a mother and daughter, tending to tiny flower pots on the balcony. Emily smiled, a soft, radiant smile I hadn't seen in years. I looked at her, my hand wrapped around hers, the same hand that once trembled, now warm, steady, and full of life. Life had been cruel, but within that cruelty, we discovered the meaning of rising again. I used to think revenge meant making those who hurt us suffer. But now I understand. The most beautiful revenge is to live peacefully, freely, and happier than ever before. No more hatred, no more scars dragging behind us. We no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, only that we were strong enough to forgive and brave enough to move forward. I lifted my eyes toward the brilliant sunrise outside. Its warmth, unwavering and golden, felt like a promise. No matter how long the night lasts, the sun will always rise. If you've ever been hurt, ever had to choose between staying or walking away, tell me your story. Because sometimes your story might just be the small light that helps someone else find their way out of the dark.